Hello, and welcome to the Opera Glasses podcast, the official podcast of Opera Canada magazine. I'm Michael Jones, your host, and this is an extra special episode of Opera Glasses. It is our 8th for season 4, and we typically don't issue one during the summer. But this seemed like a really ideal opportunity to welcome the new general director at the Canadian Opera Company, Ian Darrer, both to his new role and to Canada. Ian joins us having spent the last number of years as general director at Dallas Opera, and he officially moved to Canada about 3 weeks ago. So welcome to Canada, Ian, and welcome to the Opera Glasses podcast.
Thank you so much, Michael. I'm so thrilled to be here. I really appreciate the invitation to participate.
Well, I think it will be really interesting for our listeners, even those who are across the country, to have an opportunity to meet you, because there's always a lot of questions when a company the size of COC goes through a search process. And everyone that I've spoken to is very excited that you were coming here. So I'm anxious to meet you myself and to hear what's in store. But why don't we just start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you ended up here?
Well, I kind of feel like I was born in an opera house in a lot of ways. From a very early age, opera was always in my family. My parents were amateur singers, and I grew up outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, and both of them sang in the opera corps. And so they had fostering a love for singing early on. And I was often taken to rehearsals as a kid to, probably just sit in the room and be a good boy. But at the end of the day, I was observing and absorbing a great deal of opera. Eventually, I was in the children's chorus. Eventually, I was in as a super and began an interest in singing in the chorus myself when I was about 15, 16 years old. I started taking private voice lessons because I was so enamored with it. And I thought, well, maybe this will be what I want to do when I grow up, is be an opera singer. And that really carried me for quite a while. Went to college and in Dallas, Texas, at Southern Methodist University, and I was had every intention on being an opera singer. So I got a degree in voice, studied with a wonderful tenor who was in his late 70s at that time, named Thomas Hayward. And he had been a longtime professor at SMU and kind of a wonderful career at the Met in the 50s. At any rate, I really just kind of kept going through thinking I was going to be an opera singer until I realized how fascinating working backstage was. And part of my work study that I had a scholarship was to be the assistant for the opera department. And that opened up a whole new world for me. And I ended up doing an internship at the Dallas Opera in my last year at SMU, which really opened up a lot of the doors for me. My teacher at that time was very, very helpful in getting me into the Dallas Opera, as far as just introducing me to the artistic administrator, a man named Jonathan Pell, who said, well, of course you could be an intern, but we have a kind of an unusual situation right now. The director for our upcoming show, which was Elektra by Richard Strauss, has had to cancel at the last minute for a variety of reasons, which I can't get into right now. But a different director, one who is here right now, John Copley, is directing Il Trovatore. He's agreed to stay on and direct Elektra. However, we don't have an assistant for him. And would you be John's assistant? And I had no idea what any of that meant. So I said yes. and that was the beginning of me branching out into production. And I ended up going to Santa Fe Opera that summer. It was 30 years ago, 1996. And that was my first professional job outside of graduating with a degree in voice that I never used. I was absolutely smitten by working backstage, and I became a stage manager. I became an assistant director. Did a lot of that freelance for quite some time. Thought that was it. I was just going to be a director, something along those lines. And then my career kind of changed again because I was getting my master's degree, this time at Northwestern University in Evanston, which is just north of Chicago. And I was doing an elective class in lead. I was getting a directing degree, but I needed an elective class. And I thought, well, I can sing one German art song, and that's fine. Well, I happened to be singing on a day in which the professor was sick and couldn't be there, so he designated his wife to be the professor that day, and that was Mignon Dunn, mezzo soprano. And Mignon heard me sing in this class and said, "Why are you directing? You need to be singing." And so I kept going back and forth in this world of should I be a director? Should I be a singer? What should I be doing? Ultimately, it all settled down. I made a decision that administration was really a natural fit for me. I was at New York City Opera as an intern that eventually turned into a full-time job as head of, well, it was the rehearsal department. I was doing the daily schedule, and I was also taking care of all the musical cuts. And at that time, City Opera was doing, I think, 16 operas in a year. They'd do 8 in the fall and have a hiatus for the ballet, and then come back and do another 8. So it was a huge amount of opera, and just the volume that I was dealing with taught me a lot in a hurry. Then I ended up doing essentially the same job a few years later at the Lyric Opera of Chicago, and I stayed there for 8.5 years, worked my way up to head of the rehearsal department, which is like company management, and then eventually director of production. I was so enjoying that, but I also really always had kind of another pull towards wanting to have a little more artistic say. The production side of things was very exciting, but I also knew that, I had a background in voice. I had a great appreciation for singing, and I always kind of dreamed of being able to help with casting. So that opportunity came to me vis-a-vis the Dallas Opera, where I had, first had my big break through an internship in Dallas Opera, and then coming back in 2014 as artistic administrator. That was kind of a roller coaster 2 years as artistic administrator. I then got another opportunity in 2016 to lead a small company in Louisville, Kentucky called Kentucky Opera. It's the state opera of Kentucky. And I was invited to be the CEO there, and I loved that set of responsibilities. And it was a mighty company for its size, what it could do. A modest budget compared to the Lyric Opera of Chicago for sure, or Dallas Opera. But it was an opportunity for me to really get my hands in doing everything. When you're working for a smaller company and you're the head of a smaller company, you do a lot. And so that was a real opportunity for me to learn firsthand about fundraising, firsthand about marketing. So I did that for 2 years before Dallas, another opportunity came back from Dallas, and this time to lead the company that I had left. And so I went to Dallas in 2018 as general director, and I was there for 8 years.
In many ways, Dallas has been your home throughout various stages of your career, between school and interning and having a stint there in the middle.
There are 3 distinct chapters for sure in Dallas. When I was a student at Southern Methodist University, they were performing at Fair Park, which is kind of a notorious venue for opera. It was the home of the Dallas Opera for all of those early years when it, with Maria Callas and Nicola Rochigno and the whole early years of Dallas Opera. But as a venue, it certainly had a lot to be desired, and that was something that was front and foremost for the board of the Dallas Opera for decades. And so when I went back, it was after they had opened a brand new opera house called the Winspear Opera House, and that is in the Dallas Arts District. And coincidentally, the Winspear is very similar in a lot of ways to the Four Seasons Performing Arts Center. In fact, they have the same acoustician. Dallas had this brand new opera house, and then when I came to Toronto, I was struck by how similar the venues are, not only from the acoustic standpoint, but both just stunningly, geared for great acoustics for live performance, but the footprint of the auditorium, the number of seats, all of that kind of stuff. So in a way, it felt very familiar.
Why Toronto? Why did this opportunity interest you when you heard about it?
Well, it's a company I've certainly known about for a long time, and it has always been mentioned with the highest regard throughout the industry. I knew people that have worked here either as directors or singers, and some of the staff as well that I've known throughout the years. And I knew that it really seemed to be on this artistic high. It really had grown in its artistic levels. In fact, even in my earliest years working backstage as a production assistant and or stage manager, worked with Richard Bradshaw at the Santa Fe Opera, and so I remember with great fondness Richard, and so those kinds of things just all come together, and you think to yourself, aha. This is something I need to give a very, very serious consideration. Then you come to realize how lucky the company is with the facilities that it has, not only the Four Seasons Center, but also the rehearsal facility it has in the 227 Front Street property, which it's exquisite, and it's absolutely charming. And charming for old buildings also means it's got a lot of work that needs to be done to it. But I'm getting old. I have work that needs to be done to me too. So we just have to commit to work together on that. But the company itself really just continues to unfold and welcome me, which I was so excited about, because this company has. I mentioned the reputation, but you get here and you realize that not only do you have a great deal of people that have experience, but there's also wonderful expertise. And so you don't often get expertise and experience that overlap, but COC seems to be very rich with that. And that's a real delight to be able to come into a situation that there's pride of place in this company, but the city itself is proud of the Canadian Opera Company.
And what do you think you bring to the role that's unique for you? Why you? What's special?
Well, I think as a general director, what's unique about me is that I've kind of hit many different jobs in an opera house. From performing, I didn't have an A-level house career by any stretch of the means, but I certainly did perform a lot, and I know what it's like to be on the stage, and I know what it's like to go through the challenges that a singer goes through, whether it's just, the battling allergies or battling, not feeling well, all the things that just creep up and affect the way you perform. Then later in life, you begin to realize, as a stage manager, you're working on one opera at a time. And when you're in administration, you maybe, of course, you have to deal with the challenges that are presenting themselves to you today, whether it's a sick cast member or, part of the set that isn't functioning the way it should, or maybe that set hasn't arrived yet from wherever it's supposed to be. But all of these things kind of come together for your daily problems, but you're also planning many years out. So you are thinking about today, but you're also thinking about 3, 4, 5 years in advance. Add to that then later the responsibilities of a general director, and you have to do all of that. And now you're not calling the show, you're not creating the schedules anymore, but you're overseeing that, you're kind of steering the ship. but you're also then responsible for all the mechanisms that are going to help pay. How do you market? How do you line up the money that you need to in advance, or at least start discussions about that, and offer a fair amount of inspiration along the way? Because if I'm not inspired by it, if the artistic director Roberto is not inspired about it, we're going to have a hard time rallying support. So those are the kinds of things that, it's been an evolution in my own career that have at least given me experience through the many facets that you need to bring opera to the stage. I never went out thinking I need to accrue all these different skills, but it just happened. And I think it's made me fairly uniquely positioned. Also, having the benefit of having spent some incredible times at some very, very remarkable institutions, opera companies, and working under some leaders. When I was at Santa Fe Opera many seasons, I worked under John Crosby, who was the founder. He was also a conductor, but he was the founder and general director of the company. And later in Chicago under Bill Mason, in some of his last few years at Lyric Opera of Chicago. In New York City Opera, I was there in the last year or so of Paul Kellogg's time as general director. So I felt very lucky that I had great colleagues that were mentors along the way.
You talked about the fact that opera seasons are planned often years in advance. So the 26-27 season for the Canadian Opera Company, which will start in September, was not one that you had that much hand in planning, I would imagine. So I think what might be interesting for you to tell us is what of the season, what are we doing this season that's particularly exciting to you as someone who came into a season in many ways like audiences do?
Well, absolutely, and it's true, Michael. I mean, I inherited the planning, and that actually is true for the ensuing season after the 26-27 season as well. My footprint won't be felt in the COC programming for several years. By the same token, I've left programming in Dallas that my successor there has inherited as well, and that's just the nature of the way things happen in this. But I think for me, of course, there's always a great excitement around the world premiere. And so Empire of Wild that was a new story for me. So I read the book, and I'm very excited to see how that translates to the stage. I've been very lucky in my life to participate and help produce many world premieres. There's nothing quite like that excitement in an opera company. It always kind of pushes people to their boundaries in some ways. But at the same time, you are dealing with the creations, bringing all these things together. I mean, opera in so many ways is problematic. You would think, how are we bringing all of these things together and it's not, a collision? And all the different kind of variables that can happen when you have a new work. The composer is Ian Cusin, and the work that he is doing with the librettist, with the whole team to kind of bring this together, that is an evolution, and those things will continue to evolve over the next several months. And you are working with a lot of people that are going to be coming into a room very soon together and going through all of this for the very first time together. So you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to get inspired a lot. You're going to get frustrated. Every new production goes through that, whether it's because of the challenges of realizing a set for the first time, or dealing with the costumes being made. All of those things, even on an opera that has been well established, and a new production of La Boheme, for example, it's fraught with challenges because it's a new production. When you add to that everybody has to learn this role, and you add to that the risk then you have of there literally is only one cast that knows this in the world. So you have to think of understudies, you have to think of all the backup plans so that you have those in place for world premiere. It sounds fraught, but it's actually one of the most exciting times of any opera company is to work together for that world premiere moment.
So when we think of standard opera rep as opposed to the new work, you were in the rehearsal room as a child. What's the first opera that you remember?
I remember being seated in the auditorium, and I think I was around 3 years old, while my parents were on stage in the Magic Flute. And the Magic Flute, later in life, I realized that uh, I couldn't remember offhand any of the singers, obviously, in the production, but I learned later that the woman singing the role of the Queen of the Night was actually somebody that I knew. I told her this story, and I said, "So you realize you're partially responsible because your voice is the one that I remember from my childhood as Queen of the Night." And her name was Gianna Rolandi, and she was a wonderful soprano, and she was the wife of Sir Andrew Davis, and I loved telling her that story because I had never put those things together, and by that time we had become good friends.
Other favorites?
Oh boy! Well, the standard repertoire is certainly all there. Verdi, Puccini. I think it has to do with my early time in Santa Fe, but I do have quite an affection for Richard Strauss. That first season when I was in Santa Fe, we did Daphne by Strauss, and that's not one you get to hear every day. So it was a wonderful opportunity, and just being in Santa Fe at that time where it was just like that was what you did. You every year there was going to be a Strauss opera, and you got to experience that. So I fell in love with Strauss very very quickly. Electra and Salome, clearly operas that I produced in several companies, so it's those are go tos for me. But those big titles are certainly something that you can't have a steady diet of. Either they're too rich in many ways for an opera company to have too much, but I do like them a lot.
Now, I asked this question, and I'll tell you this story in advance. I met Alexander Neef when he just became
Sure.
general director at the COC, and he was speaking then about an opera that the COC had never done that was on his absolute wish list. He desperately wanted to do it at the COC. Are there wish list pieces, bucket list pieces that you really want to do?
There are many. I mean, going back to Strauss for a second, I mean, Die Frau in Schatten is certainly a piece that I would love to. I've only done it once, and I would love to do it again. Parsifal is one that I've done once that I would love to do again. Troyen, I've never done Troyen. I love Berlioz. That is something that it would be incredibly exciting for me. War and Peace is another opera that I would love to do at some point in my life. For me, I guess I also want to make sure that we're doing something that's going to be exciting to the community, and I really want to respond to the things that are the pulse of what is exciting to not only the COC fans but also Canadian in general. There should be ways that we can activate the operatic ecosystem, as it were, to get behind some excitement for different projects in Canada.
That's an interest when you talk about the Canadian Opera Company. Because I've been in this role now for a couple of years, I've had the opportunity to ask this question a couple of times. Tahu Matheson, who's the director of music for Opera Australia, and Tim O'Leary, who I'm sure you know as the general director at Washington National Opera, I asked both of them what it means to be a national opera company. Opera, by its very nature, it's a big art form. It sits in a theater, so it's very associated with the city, the place where it is being performed.
Sure.
And so, in your mind, what makes something a national opera company, as a person who's now leading the Canadian Opera Company?
I'm glad you asked that because it's a question I've been asking myself too, and to kind of go back to one of your earlier questions of what drew me to this position, it certainly was this added responsibility of not only doing the best opera that I can for this company, which happens, majority of the opera happens in the Four Seasons Center for the Performing Arts, but there is a necessity that what we're doing should be broader than those walls. In my opinion, I think it's setting examples, but it's also creating pathways. And I think what hope we can do is by creating opera and by inspiring people to come to opera, we invite people to see how they can make that in their own communities and see how they can benefit from the performing arts in their own communities. Opera is the art form that brings all the others together under one roof. And I think if we can create a little excitement and splendor in a different community, for example, and give them inspiration to figure out what they can do to bring their community together through music, then we're doing something. The different pathways that opera presents. So as a spectator, people come to the opera and they're drawn to the music sometimes they're drawn to the costumes, sometimes they're drawn to the stories being told, sometimes they're turned off by the stories because they don't understand them, or they're in a language that doesn't translate to them, or they can't read the super titles well, something along those lines. But people are coming to the opera generally for a handful of different things, and those are the same on-ramps into the community. And I think that is something that has always been an inspiring part of what opera can do in a community. It can bring people together. So much of the joy that I get from opera is not in the actual performance, but it's in the build up to it. It's in the rehearsal. It's in the discussions of what can we do to connect to the community? What can we do to connect to the businesses? What can we do to connect to our stories outward, as well as bringing people into the building? So I think there's a inherent responsibility as a national opera company to make sure that those pathways are clear and make sure that we can lift the art form up by what we're doing and being a resource to others.
Thank you. That's a really good answer. What's interesting to me is that you, Tim, and Tahu have all answered that question very differently. I know that you know Canadian artists, that you certainly, your production of The Little Prince in Dallas last year actually had 3 or 4 of our,
Yeah.
it was our emerging younger singers in
Yeah.
it. It was, Canadians were very well represented in your Little Prince last year.
That they were, and we also had Joyce El Khoury was in our dialogues of the Carmelites in Dallas, and I mean, Joshua Hopkins has been there, and then Etienne Dupuis made his debut last year as well. What can I say? There's some fantastic singing coming out of Canada.
Who are some of the Canadian artists that you find really interesting or really exciting that you'd like to work with?
Well, I think any of the ones that I've just named. I'm also so interested in Emily D'Angelo, who an alumni, and her career just seems to be skyrocketing. So certainly an artist of incredible caliber. I also, when I was in Chicago, worked with Gerald Finley, and I mean, just one of the most elegant and exquisite artists. So that's always something in the back of my mind, of finding pathways for him as well. There are, and then when you start thinking about the levels of the legacies of great singers, with Ben Heppner, who I actually have never worked with Ben Heppner, but I mean, clearly a legend of Canadian talent. He did the world premiere of Jake Hagee's Moby Dick, which was in Dallas, and that was before my time, unfortunately. But There were just so many different connections to great singing between Canadian Opera Company and Dallas as well. John Vickers had a long career in Dallas, coincidentally of all people. So, but back to the artists that are exciting me today. I think the ones that I mentioned are really front of mind.
Good. Well, in the season you have coming, there's a lot of wonderful Canadian talent on your stage. In fact, I was just thinking about the careers of some of the Canadian sopranos that are appearing at the COC next season.
Yeah.
You have people all the way up in, we'll say, experience to Tracy Doll, who's coming back to do Despina again,
Yeah.
the COC in the fall, and Adrian Pazanka, who's singing in The Turn of the Screw, all the way down to Emily Roca, who just left the
Just
ensemble
left the studio.
and is
That's right.
singing Adina for your Elixir of Love this year. So I think you'll have a really exciting time to hear some Canadian artists this year.
Well, that's one of my favorite parts of my job is hearing new singers, and sometimes you feel like you've discovered a diamond in the rough, which is always a great investment, and other times you think, how have I not heard this voice on major stages yet? And for me, that's going to be a year ahead of me of just really great discovery and looking forward to auditions, looking forward to visiting other performances and companies, but also, we have this wonderful ensemble here, which is I have not had the pleasure of hearing all of them do their audition repertoire or anything like that, but that will happen in due course, and so that's another great thing that I look forward to. But it's not just about the singers; it's also about the creatives, and there's such a incredible legacy of great directors and designers that have come out of Canadian Opera Company. So that's another part of the future that I really look forward to exploring and finding the next generation of great directors and designers and really making sure that we're bringing back the ones that we love.
Well, we should probably close, but I'd also like people to learn a bit about you as a person. So I'm going to ask if you're comfortable sharing. How has your move to Toronto been? Where are you located? What are you enjoying about being here in this city now?
Well, I love it. I mean, the city is magnificent. It is well, it's vibrant. You come onto the subway or off the subway, and you're always encountering a great deal of wonderful activity, and its diversity, and there's just a richness in the city that feels like a very happening place. That aside, I think it's also very beautiful, and so I live kind of in the Bloor Bay area, and I have a wonderful view of the city that I love looking at and seeing the lake. And now keep in mind, it's July, so I mean the weather is highly cooperative. I know it's going to take a turn, but I think just to calm people's expectations, I did survive many years in Chicago in less than warm weather, so I'm not going into it unknowingly. The thing that I love about it too is the food. I just am so enjoying walking around, exploring the different neighborhoods and different restaurants, and really taking me out of my comfort zone in some ways to really just be able to have something new around the corner. So it's a wonderful city, and I'm truly loving being a part of it.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Ian, and thank you for joining us on the Opera Glasses podcast. I'm sure it's been great for all of our listeners to meet you. It's been really wonderful for me to meet you. One of the things that I heard after your appointment from a number of people said, "Oh, he's just such a wonderful guy." That it was really, I was really looking forward to meeting with you today. So thank you so much for joining us. The 26-27 season at the Canadian Opera Company starts this September with alternating performances of La Traviata and Così fan tutte. You can find out more information, of course, at coc.ca. This has been the Opera Glasses podcast, the end of season 4, but come back to us in the fall for a brand new season 5. We have lots of exciting plans for it. And thank you again, Ian, for joining us for today.
Thank you, Michael.
It's been wonderful meeting you. Thank you to our listeners for joining us as well.